I'm pleased to say joining me now is someone I'm sure many of you will recognise, the former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng.
Hello.
Thanks so much for coming on the Politics Hub this evening.
Great to be here.
You learned the hard way.
Well, I've been here before.
Yeah, what happens when the markets turn on you? Do you think the comparisons this week are fair?
I think they're fair. I think he's gone full maximalist in the way that we did. And what he's trying to do is essentially reshape the world order. And he's taken the view, I'm sure he got advice against that, to just do everything at once, to create maximum disruption, and then now he's rowed back. I think you're right to say that the bond market, as was the case in my and Liz Truss's experience, that was the key, because that's going to be pushing up mortgage rates for his base. I don't think he's that interested.
So you think that's what made him backtrack?
I think the last chart that you showed with the yields and all of that, I think that was critical, because I don't think he really minds about the stock market in the way that he would about the bond market, because that directly affects the government's ability to borrow, the federal government, and also mortgage rates in the US. But let's not do a lap of victory. We still have essentially a trade war with China. The tariff rates on China are 145%. They could go up further. I'm hearing things that suggest that he could ramp that up. And a full-scale tariff war, trade war, between the US and China, forget about everything else, a war between those two powers on trade will have an adverse effect on the global economy, and I think will very much drag Europe down, and possibly us as well, because you've got to remember that Europe, particularly Germany, exports a lot to China. So anything that's adversely affecting China will affect Europe's ability to export to China, and therefore European and UK GDP.
And on that, the governments say they're keeping to their fiscal rules. Do you think they should be doing that?
I think it's going to be very difficult, because given the uncertainty, I think the OBR will almost certainly revise down their growth forecasts for 2026 and 2027. We've got to remember they're, I think, 1.9% for 2026, 1.8% growth they're predicting in 2027. And if they revise those numbers down, the Chancellor will have to find more money, essentially, to pay for public services. And she'll have that invidious choice as to whether to cut public spending or increase taxes. And she could probably do a bit of both. Now, what you're asking about is the fiscal rules, which will sort of open up a whole can of worms, potentially, because the very bond markets that are that judged my budget, that judged Donald Trump, will also potentially be judging her and the Labour government if they decide to rip up their fiscal rules and just borrow more money.
So you think she should break those fiscal rules?
No, I don't think she should. But I think it's a challenging thing for her to do. And she should probably, I think, try and reduce spending. But I don't think the political appetite on the Labour benches will necessarily be there. So it's a very difficult choice. But if the OBR do revise down, they haven't revised down the forecast, but if they do, given the uncertainty, given the looming slowdown, I think it'll create huge problems for the government.
I guess, the truth is, Kwasi, I think people will be watching this, throwing things at the screen, saying, should we be interviewing you about the global economic situation after what happened? But, did you learn lessons, and do you think...
But I've lived through it. I know, I've lived through... there are very few people who've done that, and I'm looking at this thinking, this is deja vu all over again, as the man said. I think... but he's in a different position to Liz Truss, because he's a president. There's no way they can get rid of him.
Does it make you think that maybe you and Liz Truss could have survived what's happening now?
I don't want to relive that. But I think in a parliamentary system, a leader, a prime minister, is more vulnerable because they've got to bring colleagues on side than a US president. He's got his 4 years, and nothing can prevent that, short of death or impeachment. Nothing can curtail his stint, or his second term as president.
Do you think it's right that the bond market get to dictate at this level in the US and the UK?
Well, I think it's surprising that they do that in the US. We're a much smaller economy than the US. But it's striking to me that even in the US, with the dollar, with the huge size of their economy, bond traders have that influence. I've no doubt that that's what really forced him, I think, to backtrack. Now, of course, he'll never admit that he's retreating. He'll claim victory, he'll claim success. But that's clearly what's happened, is that the people around him have taken fright of what's going on in the bond market, and that's why he's backtracked.
Praful, you're a Labour councillor. Let's bring our panel back in, Tom and Praful. Is there anything you'd like to ask Kwasi Kwarteng on the panel?
I mean,
not to put you on the spot.
When you say sorry to the public.
Well, look, I've said we've gone through this a gazillion times.
I think there's something that's worth saying is that I think, as you reflected there, it was thought impossible that what happened to this country when you were Chancellor could happen to America, given its position in the global economy. Now, they call it the moron premium, the kind of the challenge that the bond traders make to decisions like this. And, let's be frank about it. The decisions you made and Liz made were moronic, and Trump's decisions are of the same character. And we should be angry about it. And we should be angry about it not just because of stock markets falling and damage to global GDP growth, but because this is going to damage living standards around the world. And this is single-handedly being done, and we have to recover as a world to find new solutions because the global order has been smashed to pieces.
And the question?
Well, another question. No, I can't ask another one.
What do you make of that?
Well, look, if you're going to try and change the status quo, there are risks in that. And clearly we've seen that. I saw that in 2022, October 22, and I think Donald Trump has done the same. But I think with Trump, I think he'll be happy with the fact that he's still got this trade war with China. I mean, as your panel said, we're not out of the woods. There's still a full-scale trade war with China, and that's ongoing. He didn't reduce the tariffs there, and if anything, he'll be looking, I think, to increase them.
I've got a slightly more niche question about the Office for Budget Responsibility, which you brought up earlier, because the Prime Minister this week said he struggles with the way that they've analysed his welfare reforms. Do you think, you and Liz Truss were always quite cynical about the Office for Budget?
I think sceptical.
Sceptical is probably the right word.
So look,
do you think he's coming around to your way of thinking?
Well, look, I think now he's in government and he's got to actually solve the problems. The OBR scoring will not help the government generate growth, because the way they score tax measures, if you try and reduce taxes, you've got to either reduce spending or increase taxes elsewhere. And what they'll say, if they revise down the figures, they'll say to the government, you've got to raise 20, 30 billion pounds or whatever it is. And then the government will have to probably raise taxes. And the problem we were trying to solve in 22 was that if you raise taxes continually, you're not going to get any growth. So it's all very well, we can score political points, but over 3, 4, 5 years, if the economy is essentially flatlining, it'll become more and more difficult to pay for public services.
And I also want to ask you, while we've got you, we've had this YouGov poll this week about who would make the best leader, and Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservatives, came fourth after Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Nigel Farage and Ed Davey. What do you think is going wrong for her?
Look, I think it's a very difficult inheritance. The Conservative Party was roundly defeated, suffered a huge defeat. 6 months afterwards, or 8 months even, I think it's difficult to judge. I mean, I remember Keir Starmer, when they lost the Hartlepool by-election, which was about a year after he became leader, people were asking for his head. They were saying this is not working. The fact that the Tories won in Hartlepool is a total indictment on his leadership. And they won the next by-election, I think it was Hayward and Middleton, by 300 votes. If they'd lost that, he'd have been out. And these things are very finely balanced. So I'm not saying that Kemi Badenoch is out of the woods. I am saying that she has a bit more time. And if you look back at the last Parliament, Keir Starmer was in a very weak position, a year after the 2019 general election.
OK, thank you so much, former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, for coming on the programme.